Mr. Victor Narro. You are a longtime activist and expert on immigration rights, a low-income worker rights. The depth of your work is truly inspiring. And I'm so grateful that you chose to spend some time with me today. And I would love if you just start with some introduction of where you started and how you landed where you are right now.
Oh, no, thank you so much. I came to this country in the 1960s from Peru, and both my parents didn't speak English. First, we ended up in New York City. Grew up in Brooklyn, New York. New York City before gentrification was really a different city, and a lot of struggles. I grew up in the 60s and 70s on the crime wave in New York City.
Yeah.
What I witnessed growing up, the struggles of my family, but also other immigrant families in my neighborhood, the violence, the crime, and also, the public school system in New York back then was really understaffed, under-resourced. And so everything culminated into me developing an awareness of justice when I was growing up. So, you usually have like a father figure, a mother figure, or somebody who influenced you. I think the streets influenced me, like what I witnessed. After I graduated, I moved down to Virginia to go to Virginia Commonwealth University. And then after university, I went to law school at University of Richmond. Back then, there was a strong student movement to dismantle apartheid in South Africa. And that's when I learned about the teachings of the late Desmond Tutu. My book is coming out soon, hopefully next month. The Activist Spirit focuses a lot on the teachings of Desmond Tutu. But I embraced St. Francis of Assisi, his teachings many years ago, and I studied how he was influential with Cesar Chavez and other activist leaders. And I embraced his concept of interconnectedness. And the work for justice is not, it's about the task and the activities. It's about strategic planning, campaign planning. So there's a lot, it really involves the analysis, how to utilize your resources. That's part of it. The other part of it is what's inside of you, that interconnectedness. Like we're all human beings working together trying to uplift each other, no matter whether you're a lawyer, an organizer, a policy advocate, a community leader, a member of a union or a member of a community group. We're all interconnected. Like we all have to be able to work together into the process. And so I focus on that daily as well, because I think relationship matters, interconnectedness matters. Otherwise, we're not going to be successful in carrying out what the work for justice. As you know, from the labor movement, it's high stakes, these campaigns. People's lives are at stakes. And this is becoming more apparent in the pandemic. Any campaign that relates like criminal justice, racial justice, or address violence, workers' rights to unionize or to organize workers, immigrant rights, to deal with fighting the attacks on immigrants, people's lives on the balance. And so we absorb all that. So that's why we also need to be there for each other to interconnect. Yeah,
it's very deep emotional work. And you burn out if you don't self-care, because it's like you absorb the suffering. And we have to keep going and not just burn out. What you say about the spirituality actually really deeply resonates with me, because I don't think we talk about that enough. I'll be honest with you, coming out of the labor movement, you see alcoholism, you see other self-medicating coping strategies, because it's just so heavy. It's heavy on your soul. I like that you're paying attention and forcing us to pay attention to relieving that pressure.
And historically, the left and social justice movement has shied away from this topic about spirituality, because it's not about diminishing the work. It's about how we care for one another in the work. And if we see one of us struggling, how do we uplift that person? It could be on your organizing team. It could be your staff, your colleague. I think social justice activists, we absorb so much, the trauma of the communities around us that we're trying to help. But then issues that we struggle. We're all family members. We all have children. We all have parents. We all lost. I think the pandemic is highlighting this, because everyone lost friends, colleagues, family members in the pandemic. And
we're all living the experience, Tell me, how did you land in California?
When the uprising happened in Los Angeles, I think it called me to come out here. I saw it as the calling for me to come out here and really become part of the process of healing, but also of addressing the issues of inequality, the issues that really led to the uprising, the issue of poverty,
Right.
inequality of income. I credit organizations like the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights in Los Angeles. Today it's 100 staff members statewide. Back then it was just 15 to 20 of us in a small office. My first interaction relationship with a labor leader was with Durazo, when she was a hunger strike. United HOA Local 11 were organizing service workers at USC, and Marielena was a hunger strike. She invited immigrant rights leaders and activists to join her, and I joined her. I fasted for a day as part of the solidarity in the hunger strike, and she lasted, she really endured almost 2 weeks. I came to develop total respect for her commitment to workers and immigrants. And soon after that, I formed a relationship with Mike Garcia, who was really organizing the whole movement, the SEIU Local 1877, which is today's United Service Workers West, USWW, but back then it was SEIU 1877, the Justice for Janitors campaign.
Yeah.
One of the campaigns where I got to grow and develop, and a lot of the relationships I have today with different activists and labor leaders came out of that campaign. Between Local 11, the hotel workers organizing, and the janitors, I then connected with immigrant rights movement within the context of the labor movement.
So were you working for the unions, or were you just?
I was working with the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights at that time. We were building out the organizing day laborers, the day labor program, which today is a national network. The National Day Labor Organizing Network. And then we were also organizing a small domestic worker organizing project, which today now you have the whole national
The
domestic
coalition,
workers.
right.
But back then there was very few organizations focusing on workers that didn't have the benefit of a union contract because of the makeup of those industries.
Right.
And the garment industry was the other industry that was focusing on. I also found opportunities to make a connection between those workers and workers from other unions or labor leaders and organizers.
Right.
So it becomes a broader movement for workers' rights.
With the recent passage of SB 62, which was a huge victory, and I know you were a fundamental component of that work, that has international implications. How do we impart lessons learned? What would you see as this magic? When did you see the magic of the unity between organized and unorganized workers?
The magic this really blossomed a few years ago during the 5 for 15 campaign. When I started doing this work in the early 1990s, there were only like 5 worker centers. Now we have over 300 worker centers around the country. Every city or state has at least one worker center. I saw it all come together like in the 5 for 15, because the 5 for 15 was another model of fast food workers trying to organize for better working conditions. They were heavily supported by SEIU, which is a major national union, to continue the fight. But worker centers also started looking at issues of wage and hour, egregious wage theft. There's major wage theft in these industries, but also how to increase labor standards like the minimum wage. In 2015, we all came together, the labor movement in LA, the LA County Labor Federation under the leadership of Rusty Hicks, and the worker centers. So we all came together to form an alliance to lift up the standards in Los Angeles, create the 5 for 15, but also wage theft enforcement. And what came out of this, we have today $15 an hour minimum wage, but we have the Office of Wage Standards in the city.
Yeah.
That workers can go to enforce the $15 an hour minimum wage. That came out of the result of the strong partnership alliance building with worker centers and unions. The Garment Worker Bill you referenced, SB 62, I worked on that back in 1999 when I was at the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights in Los Angeles. The original Garment Worker Protection Bill, AB 633, the Davos Steinberg bill. I worked on that in partnership with Julie Su, Angie Wei, who just started the California Labor Federation, Katie Kwan from UC Berkeley Labor Center, Aloha Joe Fu, and others. We worked together to create the original bill, but it didn't solve all the issues, because 20 years later we had to come back to the legislature with the leadership of Marielena Durazo. We took the next leap of faith forward, which was to eliminate the system that has created the serious level of wage theft in the government industry, the piece rate system.
Yeah.
So today, government workers have to be paid by the hour, no longer by the piece. But the California Labor Federation was a strong supporter and sponsor. It was a major bill last year in partnership with Government Worker Center, and then in partnership with legal services organization, Best Ethic Legal Services, and then in partnership with a great policy advocacy organization, the Western Center for Law and Poverty. We all work together to
extraordinary work.
And you look at the history of social justice work, these are allies that traditionally haven't worked together in past years, but today we're all working together. You jump into the process and form alliances, relationships, and, no matter what happens, because policy campaigns, sometimes you don't get the outcome.
Right.
You don't get that perfect legislation. You have to compromise.
Right.
But you take those relationships with you, and the successful campaigns then makes us want to even strengthen those relationships.
Keep pushing further, right? Because it's a long process. It's never just done. Where do you see it going next?
The pandemic has highlighted what's always been the economic inequality crisis in this country, and there's a reason why workers are not going back to their jobs. The reason why you've seen these major activity organized on the part of workers in the past few months. I think that's going to continue. Workers are realizing that, in the pandemic, it's workers who have suffered the harm. Many workers have lost their lives, or they've gotten very sick because of lack of protection by employers, especially the frontline workers, the essential workers, like government workers and healthcare workers, grocery workers. It shows the inequalities in the system, and the labor movement has a perfect golden opportunity now to step up, because people have a better understanding of unions. The labor movement now has the opportunity to step up to a challenge, but we still gotta do a lot of work.
Right. So what I hear is the concept of collaboration, partnerships, and relationships is key, and just building them across the state, up and down, and using a hospitable political environment to keep pushing as far as we can. One of the things that has been very intriguing out of the SB 62 campaign was this concept of the untraditional allies, to make the case and to get additional support for legislation. I'd love to hear more about getting to the governor signing the bill, what your obstacles were and how you saw it getting passed.
The first obstacle is the immense level of resources that the opposition has, right? Now, corporate America has the resources. I mean, even because the labor movement has been weakened in the past decades, when you think in terms of the resources, because the union density is so low in this country. So we need to revive that. But corporate America hasn't weakened as far as resources. They have the resources to destroy these kind of policy efforts. And in California, of course, we have the Chamber of Commerce. They'll pick their bill that they like to list as which I think is so inhumane, that they call the government worker bill a job killer, when so many government workers were losing their lives producing great.
How about a people killer?
That's why I think relationship building matters. The broader your coalition and your sponsorship, then the more you can leverage resources collectively to try to deal with what the opposition is going to bring to the table. But then it's relationship building.
Of course.
And part of the campaign strategy should not only be about winning, it should also be about have you develop strong relationships and have you created leadership with the workers. Those should be two pivotal questions to address in every campaign. There was also the component of organizing, like these workers, their stories, we open up spaces for them to meet with legislators. I think the partnership is really helpful, because in order to go against the Chamber of Commerce, we need a powerful alliance building like that to embrace this campaign and sponsor it and join us in the fight for it. The other thing is, it doesn't stop now, right? That you can pass these laws, but then the implementation is the next step. So now these same groups are all working together.
Right.
Because the laws are meaningless unless they become real. They become a reality for them.
Half the battle is passing it, and the other half is implementing it. That's right. Is the next step the right to unionize now? Or
the first step is to enforce the joint liability provision, so that retailers can no longer circumvent the law of brand manufacturers. They have to be responsible for the government contractors. The first thing is to bring justice to the workplace for these workers, to make sure that they are going to be, because government work, all my research I've been doing through the Labor Center the past 20 years on the government industry has shown that they're making $3 or $4 an hour. we gotta fix that, and I think the implementation of SB 62 will get us to that. Once you get to that pace, then you can look at the other bringing in new models of organizing these workers, but these workers need to be paid the wages that they're owed.
Tell me about the alliances with the businesses.
So that's the other thing is alliance building. Sometimes we have to go outside of a bubble because that's powerful alliance building. That really adds strength to a campaign.
Yes.
The opportunity presented itself because there's been new dynamics in the apparel industry. Smaller employers, they are not connected with the Chamber of Commerce or the retail associations, but there are many of them. They want to be successful in the apparel industry, but they don't want to do it off the back of the workers. They want to do it in a way where they also are treating the workers with dignity and respect.
Yeah, yeah.
And they came forward to join this coalition, 150, and they formed their own alliance.
Amazing, amazing.
And they reached out to the governor's office. They support the law. I think that influenced the governor or any influence, not just the governor, but any Democrat. That was a powerful ally, and they really came to embrace these workers. But they also showed the governor, look, there's a lot of responsible businesses who want this legislation. And I think that was a great development that was so helpful. The other alliance builder was the Catholic Church. So I tapped into network of Catholic activists, and it began with the Archdiocese, and then it led me to the Catholic Conference. What they bring to the table is not just the moral issues, but they have a huge network. They appeal to the governor from the Catholic principles and perspective. And Gavin Newsom is strongly rooted in Jesuit tradition. So I even had Michael Kennedy and the Restorative Jesuit Project reach out to the governor as well. You get out of your bubble, your comfort zone, reach out to all these entities. And now today, there's a great relationship now that we have with the Catholic Conference.
All of what you're saying is amazing. And we should celebrate. And then, as you're saying, we keep building. Get outside the bubble, look at the power map. Who's on the map and what do we have in common with them? Who's our enemy? And what is it? The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And how do we create allegiances with them? That's what we need to be doing to uplift workers. And it really makes me sad, Victor, because I feel like we're so farther along than we were 20, 30 years ago, but we're so not at the same time. There's still so much inequality and there's still so much poverty and union density is still going down and capital keeps winning.
And I think we're still a challenge. One of the challenges the pandemic's highlighted, we need to get out of our silos. There's so much injustices out there that we're almost forced to stay within one category, one silo.
Yeah.
But all the issues are interconnected. Like we got the $15 an hour minimum wage in Los Angeles, but then the housing crisis, the lack of affordable housing, that $15 an hour is no longer valid. It's all connected. That's why I think relationship building matters, because then it breaks us out of our silos. But then relationship building has to be nurtured. You don't just do it for one campaign and then forget about that person or that organization and then come back to them when you need them for the next campaign, because then you start to feel like it's more like a strategy, not a relationship. Relationship building, you have to nurture, you have to keep it, make it part of your daily work. We have to invest in the relationship.
And we only come when we need to take and not give.
We're human beings. We have the capacity to determine authenticity. Right? What's genuine, what's not genuine. And so the relationship building is really something that for us should transcend the campaigns themselves, but then they become super instrumental and important when we are involved in the campaigns.
All of that translates to politics and the legislature, because it is all about relationships and not just showing up the day before you need them to vote for something.
Advocates call me and say, I'm in the beginning embryonic stages of developing my work in policy and working with elected officials. I was telling the elected officials, they were human beings. And they are also under major stress and demand. So the relationship you build with elected officials is super important. You always have to also invest in that relationship, because I think there's a tendency sometimes we form a great relationship with an elected official who's there for us in a particular campaign. But once the campaign ends, out of sight, out of mind.
And maybe don't even say thank you.
Don't even, with term limits and everything, that same elected official will be in another capacity when you're gonna need them. And so if you haven't been developing that relationship, then they're gonna see you as somebody who just reaches out to them when you need them.
Speaking of term limits, what do you see as our opportunities in the next, couple cycles, a whole legislate within 6 years, we may have a whole different face of the
Yeah,
legislature.
that's why it's never ending, the
Yeah.
process of relationship building. You always have to continue that process, and then you develop new relationships. We should not see it so much as work. We should see it something that we should be doing as social justice advocates, because we owe it to our community. And then with that, we're not perfect. There is implosions,
Right.
human
It's
beings. So by
fighting.
nature, when you form a relationship, you're gonna have moments
Yeah.
of tensions
Yeah.
and disagreements. Then we gotta figure out how to do that, how to resolve conflicts within ourselves. It happens in the immigrant rights movement. It happens a lot in the labor movement.
Right.
When there's conflict inside a movement, how do we create a process of really having meaningful dialogue to resolve
Right.
conflicts and not
Blow the whole
implode?
thing up. That's right. The second thing I was thinking of is the challenge of building relationships where maybe they don't do what you want them to do. Or maybe they're a moderate and you're a progressive, or you're a moderate and they're a progressive, or maybe they're a Republican. We're all human, but there's moments where sometimes it's hard to find the
Yeah,
unity.
we have to have those pause buttons. Like at the moment there's internal issues of development, either conflict or internal disagreement, that they could have the ability to really have a negative impact on the campaign or a coalition. That's when you push the pause button and you go in and we talk. I mean, we're all in the work for justice and we all care about the issue enough to be able to pause and just step into it. We try to resolve it.
Yeah.
And try to figure out strategies to resolve the conflict. Because if we don't do that, then the conflicts carry with us, and they have the potential where they can actually impede the campaign or strategy.
Then the systems get stronger. We don't dismantle inequality. It gets stronger when we dissolve, when we have conflict, right? Well, but again, like going back to what if that person they don't identify as a justice oriented person, but you need to build a relationship with them. They're important. That's challenging, right?
It's challenging. We're always not gonna get everybody to come to our side in a particular campaign, but I've had like dialogue with other business community members or community residents. When we were organizing day laborers in the 1990s, we were running into opposition from certain neighborhoods, residents. They were calling the police and everything. And my organizers and I, we had to go into those spaces to have that dialogue, get them to, not so much they're going to come over to the side of embracing the day laborers, but at least get them to better understand the situation that the day laborers are coming from. You can diminish then the challenges. We're not going to win them over, but at least we got to develop empathy. We did that with police officers, where LAPD officers were harassing a day labor corner. Once we got the face-to-face engagement between the officer or the sheriff's deputy and the day laborers, and we facilitated that dialogue.
Wow.
Yeah, they weren't going to embrace each other as friends, but they got to understand each other's perspective better. That it diminished the harassment. It made it just go away. It's tapping into our potential to at least have compassion and empathy for an issue. We may not agree with it, but we may have sympathy for the person who suffers from it. If we can develop empathy, a sense of empathy, then we diminish the situation. Right? I'm also not naive about this. I know that there are just the right-wing forces within corporate America, within right-wing think tanks, filled with a lot of hate towards immigrants. And there is a strategy to destroy the labor movement.
That's right.
So I'm not going to be naive and say I can win them over, I can have them develop sympathy. Right. So a lot of it's assessing, right? Listening to your inner wisdom, like what makes sense to pursue. Where do I want to spend my effort, like trying to, one of these anti-union law firms trying to get them to change.
Right. You're like, I'm wasting my time here. Yeah. Victor, I have learned so much from talking with you. I came out of the Labor Center at Rutgers University. So the fact that you come out of the UCLA Labor Center, I feel a kinship to you. You are East Coast too. I just feel like different coasts, same movement, same struggles. I've been in California for 11 years. There's still so much history I don't know. I learned a lot from you, and I thank you for that. The words and wisdom that you are sharing is going to be important and heard. This way of living is not sustainable with inequality. especially when we know that fascism is rising in the United States. And it is our job to fight that. That's what we have to do.
Joan Baez, one of my favorite singers, she turned 81 on Sunday, but she has a beautiful quote that we have no control over how we're going to lead this lifetime. What we do have control is how we live this life. I just think the work for justice, the concept of service to others, is a life well lived. So that when the moment comes for you to pass on, you know you will have lived a life well lived. No matter what you do, it could be immigrant rights, it could be services, it could be public service. It could also be union organizing. No matter what you commit your life to, you will have lived a life well lived. We all do know that our lifetime is terminal, right? We will end this life. And so the question is, will you have lived a life well lived? And I think social justice work, the work for justice, is a life well lived.
That's very beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for joining me.
Yeah,
And
thank you so much.
absolutely, an utter pleasure. Thank you.